Hello, we'll talk now about John Hejduk, a very important architect who died in the year 2000s. And let's read a little bit about him. John Quentin Hejduk, born on the 19th of July 1929 and died in July 2000, was an American architect, artist, and educator of Czech origin who spent much of his life in New York City. Hejduk is noted for having had a profound interest in the fundamental issues of shape, organization, representation, and reciprocity. John Hejduk studied at the Cooper Union School of Art and Architecture, the University of Cincinnati, and the Harvard Graduate School of Design. He worked in several offices in New York, including that of I.M. Pei and Partners and the office of A.M. Kinney and Associates. He established his own practice in New York City in 1965. Hejduk was professor of architecture at the Cooper Union for the Advancements of Science and Art, School of Architecture from 1964 to 2000 for 36 years, and Dean of the School of Architecture from 1975 to 2000. So for 25 years, he was the dean of this famous architecture school. His arrival, including the cooperation of many other influential professors, including Raymond Abraham, Ricardo Scofidio, Peter Eisenman, Charles Guethmy, Diana Agreste, Diane Lewis, Elizabeth Diller, David Shapiro, Don Wall, I would add Lebbeus Woods, and many others. Of course, this is an impressive list. He transformed the practice and critical thought of architecture in ways that might be compared to Ludwig Mies van der Rohe's transformation of the Armour Institute in Chicago into the Illinois Institute of Technology. Here he was, John Hejduk. Here he is again. I don't know who the other two people are, but the man on the right is John Hejduk, looking at the model of Saint-Pierre de Firminy-Vert by Le Corbusier. Here he is, probably at some evaluation with other professors and students. Here he is again, inside the Cooper Union School of Architecture. Some drawings. He had all kinds of inspirations. He loved literature, he loved plastic arts, he loved Mondrian. You see influences of Dichtel, of, well, Mondrian mainly, Theo van der Spurg. In terms of literature, he also wrote poetry and published beautiful books with drawings, with poems. He was a very interesting and seminal figure, and there were some critics who thought that he was the most important architect at the end of the 20th century in the world. I wouldn't go so far, but he was indeed a very interesting architect. Not so much, in my opinion, for what he built, but for what he drew, for what he envisioned. Hourglass number 2 in the Netherlands, in my opinion, it's a house that is not truly sorry for being so abrupt, but I don't think it's a truly great architecture. It's, you know, it's the architectural language of those New York Five or the New York Whites, although he doesn't use here too much whiteness, but you can tell, you know, he's in the realm of the same formal language that Louis Kahn accused of being more concerned with what is not right done, you know, perfectly. Although here we can't really say that it's done perfectly. You know, Louis Kahn said that in opposition to the Playboy architects, the New York Five, he preferred to do what is right the wrong way than to do what is wrong the right way. And I'm not sure we can say this building is done the right way, but it's still somehow artificial, this architecture, and you know, the playfulness when it shows up, it's rather contrived, like the window on the first floor, for example. You know, it's okay. I'm not against accidents. I'm not against exceptions, but it's a little bit. I don't know how to put it, you know, because I'm not against superfluous either, but it's too conveniently, you know, formalized. I know that Frank Lloyd Wright comment, not Frank Lloyd, sorry, Kenneth Frampton had something to say about this element that unites this corp and the other one. It's an architecture by dimensionality rather than three dimensionality. And yes, this architecture by dimensionality perhaps is not the best an architect can do. This is the old building of Cooper Union. Morphosis, that is Tom Main, built a new building across the street from this building, which again Kenneth Frampton absolutely hates. But back to the building in the Netherlands by John Hejduk. You know, I always suspected that John Hejduk has elements of masochism and sadism in architecture. And when I look at this wall that actually interrupts, you know, the connection with it's a separation between this part of the building and this part of the building, and it's quite brutal, you know. It's a screen made of concrete that needs to be pierced in order to arrive on the other side. And I think there are elements here of sadistic architecture, if I am to express myself in this way. Why exactly he created that, you know, fortress-like wall there in order to pierce it, in order to arrive at what is beyond it, I do not know. This is what Kenneth Frampton said about this house. Let's read it. A starting point for discussing the deflection of the vocabulary of Le Corbusier towards Hejduk's own design intentions can perhaps be provided by the idea of promenade, which was important to Le Corbusier. According to Le Corbusier, movement provides continuously changing visual fields within an architectural visual horizon that is constant over at least part of the trajectory. Thus, verity is set within one or more clearly perceived organizing frameworks. In the wall house, the house that we saw by John Hejduk, movement is associated with a visual field that changes only minimally within a given horizon, as in the approach corridor, or with abrupt changes of the horizon of reference as when the wall is crossed. The interplay between the changing shapes of visual fields according to incremental changes of local position and the relatively constant horizon is negated. One might argue that the landscape outside the house is the horizon of reference from the three living spaces. However, even this horizon is disassociated from the spaces that channel movement. The wall house, can indeed be read as a handling of movement that is equivalent to an anti-promenade. If Le Corbusier's design invites us to understand how controlled changes of views are produced as local variations of an underlying structure, Hejduk provides an aggregation of segmented views that instead defy synthesis. To achieve the qualities of Promenade, Le Corbusier fundamentally works with three-dimensional space. Kenneth Frampton says that Hejduk specializes in frontality. And this is what I tried to say when I talked about bidimensionality, that although a building is three dimensions, the work of John Hejduk somehow is bidimensional. That is frontal, because frontality is about two dimensions, not three dimensions. Anyway, I'm not sure that you know what Frampton said and what I try to say explain a certain discomfort with the house built, the wall house, even its name, the wall house. You know, it's the wall is seen as a restriction, as a an impediment. This is the promenade, or actually the anti-promenade, as Kenneth Frampton put it. But what's the meaning of this wall, which separates this part brutally? That's why I refer to the sadistic architecture of John Hejduk. Why is this part so segregated from this part? You know, it's a subject for discussion, I would say. Wall house, John Hejduk. This is the model of the house. Other works, he had interest in I don't know how to put it, you know, I almost said in flirting with the sacred architecture, with the church. I think he had a troubled relationship with the cross. We see here the cross on the wall, but I'm not sure he was totally at ease with his form of religiosity. Again, a drawing of the wall house built in the Netherlands, the section. Now, the Jan Palach Memorial opens in Prague. Jan Palach was a student who put himself to fire in protest of the Russian invasion of Prague. So a very sad event. And being that he was a Czech origin, he protested in his own way, or this is how he memorialized Jan Palach, by creating two houses, if we are to call them so, the house of the mother and the house of the suicide. The suicide being Jan Palach, the student, and the mother being the mother of the suicide. So I don't know if I should read this text by David Shapiro, I think. Theoretical and sculptural works, House of Suicide and House of Mother of Suicide, the funeral of Jan Palach, and David Shapiro, who was a poet, maybe he's still alive, a poet who taught at the Cooper Union. When I entered the first meditation, I escaped the gravity of the object, I experienced the emptiness, and I had been dead a long time. When I had a voice, you could call a voice, my mother wept to me, my son, my beloved son, I never thought this possible. I'll follow you on foot. Halfway in mud and slush, the microphones picked up. It was raining on the houses, it was snowing on the police cars. The astronauts were weeping, going neither up nor out. And my own mother was brave enough. She looked and it was all right, I was dead. House of the Suicide and House of the Mother of the Suicide were inspired by a David Shapiro poem about Jan Palach, which I just read. The Czech student who set himself on fire in January 1969 to protest the Soviet occupation of Czechoslovakia. Now, President Vladimir Putin called the Czechs as being Russians who drink beer instead of vodka. That's how he described the Czechs. Each house is a metal-clad cubic box of roughly 12 feet topped by 49 uniformly spaced metal shards of roughly the same height as the box bases. In the House of the Suicide, the shards are slightly splayed apart, and in the House of the Mother of the Suicide, they huddle together, rising vertically from the cubic box. The monotone gray of the sealed House of the Suicide is punctuated only by a closed slit painted red. The black House of the Mother of the Suicide can be entered. Inside one mounts a small platform, a cross between a gallows and the widow's walk, from which one can look out at the House of the Suicide through a small slit in the elevation, painted blue on the exterior. In 1991, Czech President Václav Havel invited John Hejduk, who was of Czech descent, to install the two houses temporarily at the Prague castle. So just a second, I have to move forward. So this is the one on the left is the House of the Mother of the Suicide, and the House of the Suicide Hassan is this one. There are the installation, not really, you know, just a second, I don't know. Yeah, here. So the House for the Mother of the Suicide on the right and the House of the Suicide on the left. Some sketches. Now this Trisca Socio-Cultural Center, Saint-Jacques-de-Compostelle, is a building, you know, built by him, which also shows a rather aggressive attitude. If you consider these balconies that are piercing you know, the building, and also these maybe with some echoes from La Tourette by Le Corbusier and Yanis Xenakis. I don't know what to think. It's another building, of course. The architectural language belongs to John Hejduk, but I don't know if it is really a building with glory. In my opinion, it is not, but it still stands out as his architecture. He built very few buildings, and this is one of them in Spain. He also, something else was built after he died, thanks to his friend, colleague, Peter Eisenman, and we are going to see it. This was built in Berlin. There are three buildings built in the 1980s, 1987 or so. Actually, they were destined for demolition, but the protest coming from the community of architects made the building be saved. They are apartment buildings with some strangeness. From this place, you can see actually the work, the famous work by Daniel Lipskin, who also studied at Cooper Union, was his darling. So the professor and the student with his museum, his Jewish museum in Berlin, Daniel Lipskin. But this is the work of the professor of John Hejduk. As I said, they were destined for demolition, but somehow they survived. Curious, this facade here, you know, which was even transformed through a cartoon into the face of a cat. I don't know if I have that cartoon here, but yes, the cat house, here it is. Someone, you know, indulged in, you know, in this, you know, graphic joke. with the facade of one of the buildings by John Hejduk here. Now, the house for two brothers is another curious architecture conceived by John Hejduk with the most terrifyingly, dense and labyrinthical somehow plan, although in plan it is a square. So the house for two brothers. This is the house for two brothers. It is another house that shows a schism. And indeed, Kenneth Frampton was right that John Hejduk didn't truly believe in synthesis. He believed rather in separatio, in separation, in division, in the rift. And, you see here the two sides, the two brothers. But if you look at the plan, I hope I have here the plan. No, unfortunately, it's not on this presentation. Maybe a little later. So this is in Berlin, the house for two brothers. But I wish you saw the plan, because it's the plan which on the smallest surface area, there is the largest number of doors. I never saw a house with these dimensions with so many doors. And I think someone with qualities in the field of psychoanalysis would have something to say. I was hoping the plan is here. Maybe it's not, or maybe it will be later. We'll see. The Kreuzberg Tower we already saw. Here it's that tall building. Sorry, it's that tall building that on the left and right side of the cat building, if we are to call it so, is the one on the right in this picture. It's called the Kreuzberg Tower in Berlin, built at the end of the 1980s. John Hejduk, I think his main contribution to architecture is rather in the field of education and in the field of poetry, architectural poetry, and in the field of graphics, not so much in the field of built work. Although what he built in Santiago da Compostela, meaning what Peter Eisenman built for him after his death based on his plans, I'm talking about this building. Here also we have a two-ness. We have two towers that are identical but built of different materials. And this is actually an interesting idea. Two identical buildings, two twin buildings, or almost identical, that are built with different materials. It's an interesting idea. There is a high level of artificiality here, but it is an architecture where you see duality. I almost think of what Leonardo da Vinci said, that twins are that pleasure and pain are twins. And here we see somehow a pair of this kind, pleasure and pain, masochism and sadism, open and closed, glass, transparent and opaque. But again, this was built after his death in Santiago da Compostela, near the cultural center or cultural city of culture that Peter Eisenman built. John Hejduk, one of the New York Five or the New York Whites. I don't know their function. Probably they just have some interior space that is used for installations. But a beautiful picture, no? It's about dualities. Santiago da Compostela, Spain. John Hejduk. an artwork within one of the towers. This reminds me of a work with shoes at the edge of the Danube in Budapest. You know, another protest against the Holocaust of the Second World War. And here we see what happens on the terrace of the City of Culture that was built by Peter Eisenman with a view towards the buildings designed by John Hejduk. So this building belongs to Peter Eisenman. He designed it and he built it. And these were built, as far as I know, after John Hejduk died, and probably at the initiative of Peter Eisenman. John Hejduk, what is decisive about his work is that it leads to a different place on which is both alien and inalienable. A place which consecrates architecture with mysteries that are no longer decipherable within the ordinary code of mimesis. I don't know who wrote this. It wasn't him. Another installation rather than architecture. Talking about stability and instability. Is the building as it is? If it was a building, and then it's on wheels. And I don't know why this picture is unclear. It was supposed to be with him and with an enlarged version of one page from one of his books. He did publish beautiful books on architecture, and I have a few. Here there are the four, four of the New York Five. The fifth one being himself, John Hejduk. Maybe he took the picture. On the left, Peter Eisenman. Then on the right, Michael Graves. No, on the right, Richard Meyer, and then Michael Graves, and the one on the right is Charles Widmey. This is one of the books, Mask of Medusa by John Hejduk, published by Rizzoli. A page from the book, installations, The Mask of Medusa, Buenos Aires, 1998. He valued very much literature. He was very well read, and his students equally so. And at Cooper Union, the conjunction of the arts and between various intellectual endeavors was very, very encouraged. This is the cover of one of the two books published, Education of an Architect, very unusual education in architecture at Cooper Union. This was one of the books. There were two books published. You see the Irwin S. Channing School of Architecture of the Cooper Union. Some drawings by him, Cemetery for the Ashes of Thought. Even here we see a certain aggressiveness, you know, these cubes that, this one is attacking the other one. They are kind of geometrical animals on wheels. This is a book I have, a little book. Unfortunately, his books became very expensive over the years. So the five architects, the New York Five, Peter Eisenman, John Hejduk, Peter Eisenman, Richard Meyer, Widmey Siegel, and Michael Graves. We just talked about Charles Widmey. And one day we'll talk about Eisenman, Richard Meyer, and Michael Graves. And now we talk about him, John Hejduk, dean of this very celebrated School of Architecture, the Cooper Union in New York City. Pages from his book, In the Making, installation. He was a great promoter of speculative architecture, if we are to call it so. An architecture that was inspired by an inspiring philosophy, inspired by philosophy and inspiring philosophy. with a dense, sometimes cryptical, conceptual essence. Here you can see the influence of the Japanese woodcuts on the architecture he imagined. And indeed, why couldn't we have buildings kind of like these drawings show? This was, I'm sure, built by the students, his students. Here he is in that prior picture, which was foggy. It's exactly this picture. A big man, John Hejduk, with an enlarged version of one of his the drawings. I like these drawings that are inspired by the Japanese woodcuts, which I'm sure he admired. The truth is, architecture can manifest itself in so many ways, even if you do not build. He built a few buildings, but I don't think he's so relevant with what he built. I think he's much more relevant for what he drew and for what he said and for what he imagined, for what he philosophized and for his educational strategy, not so much for what he built. How many architects would make such drawings? You know, look at this animal here and then look at this building, if we are to call it a building, you know, almost having some kind of, you know, aggressive conversation with the animal. The Wall House in the Netherlands. Soundings, a work by John Hejduk, another book that he published. Again, these books can be found, but became more and more expensive. Again, not too many architects would make such drawings. The Cathedral from 1996 is just a model. Here it is. The problem with his buildings, his built work, is that they look like models. You know, the buildings look like the models instead of having the models look or anticipate the buildings. And I think this is not quite right. But he's still a unique architect with a unique vision, and he's worth being considered, particularly again based on his drawings, on his poems, and on his educational method. Adjusting Foundations, John Hejduk. I have this book too. And here you see the, you know, the alerting effects of the Japanese woodcuts on his work. And you see quotations, André Gide, Proust, sparse and dense, reflectivity and opacity. He clearly was interested in dualities, maybe not so much in bringing them together, although we do see there the sign plus, Gide plus Proust, sparse plus dense, reflectivity plus opacity. But I don't think he achieved as Kenneth Frampton said, synthesis. Another book by him, Vladivostok. And here we see those two towers that were built in Santiago da Compostela after he died. Pages from the book, Vladivostok, with the illustrations by him and the poems. The angel catcher, interesting thought or function, the angel catcher. Why do we need to catch, so-called catch the angels? Do we really have to? On the other hand, his darling, his protege, Daniel Lipskin, said the more angels in the sky, the more space. An interesting way to put it. John Hejduk, Surrealism Architecture, the Architectural Uncanny, Berlin Mask, Architecture and Urbanism. He published important books, graphically enticing, and you know, in terms of a poetical architecture, if we are to call it so, he is very significant. And yes, his books are very beautiful. Interesting site plan here. I wish what I see on the right side of this site plan was built, but it was not. This strange aide-memoire of all the functions that he imagined, you know, for a human settlement says a lot about him. You know. Look, what kind of function this is: a mask repairman, a watch repairman, paper restorer, a carpenter, children SS, children S, children JJ, children SB, mechanic, trolley man, drawbridge man, inhabitants, park attendant, metal man. When we make urbanism, when we work in urbanism, we never think of in this way. We don't think about narratives. We don't think about real people with real functions in societies, with real preoccupations, real attributes, with personal you know, traits. We don't think like this. We simply make buildings that do not say anything about their occupiers. And I think this is a problem, because we do build for a dancer, for a musician, for an optometrist, for a rosewoman, for a metalman, for a park attendant. And why is it that we do not in any way address the not just the social function, but the psychic attributes, and maybe even the physical attributes, the preoccupations, the job, the interests, the longings of those who use our buildings? We are not interested in a narrative architecture. While he was, you see, he tried to visualize possible architectures for, you know, even the catfish or the judge, or a room for a thought, or the room of the innocent, or the room for those who looked the other way. What about a house for those who look the other way? Or the house for the timekeeper, or the house of the dead, or the house of the travelers, or the house of the exiles, or the house of the disappeared, or the house of the application? If we are to address the miserable field of bureaucracy. Anyway, an interesting man, and with a vision of architecture that is so different from most educational systems. I like this plan very much. I don't know what it was made for, but I think this would have been a very interesting, whatever it was supposed to be, kind of a settlement, a group, a cluster of buildings. Object subject drawing from the Sketchbookriga project. Well, I commented on it that there is aggressivity between these two. There is a SM relationship between them, which I find problematic. These are the buildings in Berlin. We saw this. We see other pages from some of his books. Important architects were formed in the Cooper Union, like Elizabeth Diller and Daniel Lipskind, and many others. This is what he built in Oslo. Escape. Escape from what? We see there the hourglass, so it's a meditation on life and death. He didn't escape death, and no one will. Sanctuary. I have this book as well, The Last Works of John Hejduk, with a foreword by Michael Hayes, who ran at that time the Department of Theory at Harvard University in the United States. The Cathedral. It's a little book with a huge price. Now it became very, very expensive, this little book, and it's really a little book. You see here, $752, this little book. But when I bought it was, I don't know, $12 or something like this. Now it is used, you see, used $752.10. Anyway. I think he was very concerned with death. And was he searching for the eternal? Was he searching for Domus Eterna? I don't know. But I think John Hejduk had a unique voice, if I am to express myself in this way, in architecture. Uncube. I like this word, uncube. Maybe we should, all of us, uncube ourselves. Thank you.